Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
We have now come to the mini lessons where we're going to discuss the different soul facts that Krishna shares in Bhagavad Gita. Last lesson, we read the verses from chapter 2 where Krishna explains about the soul, about Jiv Tattva, the truth of the soul. These are verses from chapter 2:12 to 2:30. And now we're going to start to discuss the soul facts. And in this first mini lesson, we're actually going to discuss two soul facts. One is about the eternality of the soul, and the other one is about the individuality of the soul. So let's go back and read the very first verse that Krishna shares about the Jiv Tattva. It is chapter 2, verse 12. Krishna speaks, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, Arjuna, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." So in this verse, both soul facts are embedded. The one about the eternality of the soul and the one about the individuality of the soul. For convenience, let's first talk about the eternality of the soul, and then we go into the topic about the individuality of the soul, because it requires a little more discussion as it is a hot topic. In 2:12, Krishna clearly states that there was no time, nor in the past, nor in the future will there be a time when he did not exist, Arjuna did not exist, nor all these warriors. So we are eternal living beings, and this is great news. And when you think about it, this is why, most likely why, we feel such a resistance towards death. Because it's not natural for us to die, and somewhere at the core of our beings, we feel ourselves as being eternal beings. If death was a fact, then it would be like a light switch, and we're just dark and gone forever. We wouldn't feel resistance or discomfort when thinking about death, our own death and the deaths of others. But we do. Unless we are really depressed, or unless a person has become really enlightened and realized that death is nothing but an illusion. It's actually a change of body, as Krishna will come later on to explain to Arjuna. Krishna, after having stated that there was no time we did not exist, and there will be no time in the future when we don't exist, goes on to emphasize that he really means what he says. And in this chunk of verses, he continued to give many ways of stating that the soul is eternal. So he says, the soul is indestructible, it is immeasurable, eternal, can never be slain, unborn, primeval, can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. Unbreakable, it's unsoluble, and can neither be burned or dried. So the material elements of nature, which destroys, alters, and decays matter, cannot touch the soul. Fire can burn a material element, water can moisten a material element, wind can wither a material element, but it cannot touch the soul, because the soul is of a completely different category. It is spiritual in its substance. In the Vedic scripture and in yoga philosophy, we get to know that the soul is made of 3 spiritual elements, and that is Sat, Chit, Ananda. It is made of truth, it is made of knowledge or complete cognizance, and bliss. Now let's move on to the soul fact about the individuality about the soul. Krishna says, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." By this statement, Krishna comes to answer a very important ontological question. Ontology is the branch of philosophy that discusses the underlying truth of all that exists. And the ontological question that Krishna answers here is, on the spiritual level, are we all the same one being, or do we have an eternal, distinguished individuality? Or to put it another way, does the soul remain an individual even after liberation from illusion? And liberation from illusion is also what liberates us from the cycle of birth and death, called samsara. This has been discussed for thousands of years in India and also outside of India, whether we are one being or many beings. In technical terms, this is sometimes referred to whether the ultimate reality is dual or non-dual. In Indian philosophy, these two schools are called Dvaita Vedanta, that is dualism, and Advaita Vedanta, non-dualism. The main question is, to frame it a little bit different, but it's the same question, on the soul level, are we one with God, or do we have a distinguished individuality from God? So which one does the Bhagavad Gita support? The Dvaita understanding, the dual understanding, or the Advaita understanding, the non-dual understanding? From verse 212, it certainly sounds that Krishna supports the one that the soul's individuality is eternal. Never was there a time when you didn't exist, or these warriors, or me, or nor in the future should there be a time. But when reading Srila Prabhupada's purports, we can understand that some commentators have argued that this individuality that Krishna is talking about is only before liberation from illusion. And many spiritual groups actually believe this. So in instances like this, we can look, or we have to look, for other verses in Bhagavad Gita to confirm or dismiss our understanding of the verse. So in chapter 50, we find such a key verse that is very important to understand more about if Krishna really means what he says. From Bhagavad Gita 15:7, the verse goes, Mamaivam so jivaloke, jivabhuta sanatana, manashas indriyani, prakritistani karshati. Mama means my, eva, certainly, amsha, fragmental particle, jivaloke, in the world of conditional life. Jivabhuta, the conditioned living entity, sanatana, eternal, mana, with the mind, shashtani, the six, indriyani, senses, prakriti, the material nature, sthani, situated, karshati, is struggling hard. Translation goes like this: the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditional life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So for us, the first part of this verse is relevant to what we are studying right now, the nature of the soul. We're studying about Jiv Tattva. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. So we are going to read from Srila Prabhupada's purport, and it's a very interesting purport. And we're just going to read a part, but I recommend you to read a full purport because it goes in depth into the theology about avatars and the different expansions of Krishna, but that is not our topic right now. So we are going to read the part which discusses the soul. Srila Prabhupada is speaking. The words Mamai Vamsha, fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, are also very significant. The fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is not like some material broken part. We have already understood in the second chapter that the spirit cannot be cut into pieces. This fragment is not materially conceived. It is not like matter, which can be cut into pieces and joined together again. That conception is not applicable here because the Sanskrit word sanatana, eternal, is used. The fragmental portion is eternal. It is also stated in the beginning of the second chapter that in each and every individual body, the fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is present, Dehi nosmin yatha dehe. That fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily entanglement, revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky, in a spiritual planet. Wow! And enjoys association with the Supreme Lord. It is, however, understood that the living entity, being the fragmental part and parcels of the Lord, is qualitatively one with the Lord, just as the part and parcels of gold are also gold. So Srila Prabhupada makes a very strong point here. If you think about it, Krishna took so much time to explain that the soul cannot be cut into pieces, it cannot be moistened, etc. It cannot be altered in any way. So if that is true, it should also be impossible to patch together the souls again, or for one soul to merge with the Brahman, which is the supreme world soul. Because in order to patch something together again, somebody must have cut that entity in the first place. And Krishna states it's not possible to cut the soul by any weapon. So if both of Krishna's statements are correct, that the soul cannot be cut into pieces and that we have always existed, then we can logically infer that the identity of the soul remains after liberation. So what does this really matter to us? Is this not just, a way of creating disagreements between different spiritual groups and just something completely unnecessary? Well, the implications of Dvaitism and Advaitism are very different in terms of the ultimate goal and how to reach there. The teleology, the end goal, becomes very different if we understand the soul to have a distinguished, eternal individuality, or if we consider the soul to be one with God. If the soul and God is the same person, is the same entity, there is no room for love. For love to exist, there has to be at least two parties, because love is a flow between at least two parties. So this is only possible for love to exist in a dual understanding, when we understand God and the living entities to be separate entities. And bhakti is the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita, the highest spiritual practice. And this is another point that can convince us that Krishna actually means what he says when he says that never was there a time when you did not exist, Arjuna, nor me, nor all these kings. And when he says that all the living beings are my eternal fragmental parts, that he means what he says. Later on, he explains that bhakti is the highest spiritual principle, the highest yoga, the highest goal, and the highest spirituality is love for God, love and devotion for God. It wouldn't make any sense for him to teach this if he meant that the soul and God are one. It makes no sense. There has to be a little division between the soul and God for bhakti, love, to exist. In Vaishnavas, or in Vaishnava theology, love is actually understood to be the glue of everything that exists. It's the glue of the ultimate reality. It's the love between God and the living beings. So why do Vaishnava acharyas, very prominent Vaishnava teachers, sometimes preach very strongly against non-dual philosophy? If you read Srila Prabhupada and other Vaishnava acharyas, you will see that sometimes they go very hard on non-dual philosophy. Why do they get so upset about this? It's a good question to ask. To illustrate with an example, we can say, just as there are human rights activists on this earth that watch that all humans should have some bare necessities to live their lives with dignity, like necessities like shelter, food, means to earn a living, some rights to make some decisions regarding their own lives. These human rights activists consider this the birthright of humans. Similarly, Vaishnavas, they are like spiritual right activists. They consider it the inherent right of the soul to develop a loving relationship with God. And this is a non-negotiable, untouchable rights of all individuals, yes, by virtue of existing. And also to connect with God and to build a relationship with God is actually the deepest yearning of the soul, whether we are conscious of it or not. And it's also what can satisfy us the very deepest. If you think about it, in our daily life, the satisfaction we get when we do something for another person is very much deeper than if we just do something for our own enjoyment. It is a different quality of satisfaction. So the same principles apply if we serve and love God and do something for God. It gives a very deep satisfaction in the soul, and it can be felt, and it is felt by people who starting to experiment with bhakti. Therefore, they are very critical of philosophers that deny people this opportunity for participating in a loving relationship with God. Vaishnavas are known for their compassion, and this is the Vaishnava compassion, that they want everybody to at least have that possibility to reconnect with God. So when Vaishnava acharyas criticize teachers of the non-dual schools, it is not because of spiritual ego, it's actually because of this deep compassion for all living beings and the spiritual right of all living beings to connect with God. So if we are lucky enough to be convinced that Krishna means what he says, that the souls have a distinguished individuality and that this individuality is eternal, we should be very grateful. And we should see it as a gift and be humble. We should not imitate the advanced Vaishnavas and argue on this topic. We can try to share this knowledge, but in a humble way. If someone is not ready to listen, we can just pray for them and wish them well. We don't have to force anybody to listen, because we are not on the level when it comes, or at least most of us, and certainly I'm not, on the level of advanced Vaishnavas and on the level of advanced Vaishnava compassion, so that we can argue on this topic. We try to share it humbly. And if somebody is not ready to accept this, we should not be surprised, because even Krishna says, and this is very interesting, in the same chunk of verses in text 29, he says, some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. So it's not a given that all people at all times can understand Jiv Tattva. So Krishna says clearly that some people, even after hearing about Jiv Tattva, they cannot understand the subject matter of the soul. So to understand Jiv Tattva, it's a gift. We should accept it, we should try to share it, but we should be humble and we should not get frustrated if a person is not ready to accept. Maybe they need just more time. To conclude, I would like to share what Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, what is known as his verdict on Vedanta, his verdict on the topic of the absolute truth. So he said, the absolute truth is Achintya Ved Abed Tattva. The absolute truth is inconceivable, one and different at the same time. So we are one in quality with God, Sat Chit Ananda, but we are not one when it comes to quantity and also in the roles that we are playing. So please remember this, Achintya Ved Abed Tattva. It's actually a perfect synthesis of the understanding of Dvaitism and Advaitism. As Krishna says, the souls are my eternal parts. So we are one in Krishna in that way, but not in quantity.